Hello, we are going to be performing a basic postural analysis on my lovely model, Kerstyn. So as Kerstyn stands here, I'm going to be starting at her feet and working all the way up through the crown of her head. And what we're looking at are basic landmarks that you can pay attention to make sure that you're finding more of a symmetry with your body. For those of you who are just involved in fitness, this is going to be so important for any type of activity that you like to perform. However, if you are a rider, this is going to greatly enhance your ability to be more confident and stable once you're in the saddle. So here we go. We're going to be starting down at Kerstyn's feet. And I've asked Kerstyn to just stand as normally as she would in everyday posture. So what I look at is, I look at where the feet are located. Is one forward or back of the other? Is one turned out farther than the other one? And where is the weight distributed, meaning are we rolling off to the outside of the foot or rolling to the inside of the foot? Ideally, what I would love to see are the middle two toes lined up with this little indentation right here in front of the ankle. So as you can see, I'd be asking Kerstyn, would you please swivel this foot a little bit forward? And in this foot, we're pretty much lined up. So there can always be differences from one foot to the other. Then as I move up this postural analysis, what I'm looking at is the middle two toes to the middle of the ankle and then up to the middle of the kneecap. Now, sometimes I will see people in a position called bow-legged, cowboy legs, if you will, or sometimes we have a knock-kneed idea. So I would like to again see this line up right through the middle of that kneecap joint. And as we look at Kerstyn's legs, we see a little bit of a deviation of a rolling in, but not much. It's not a lot that I really need to fix at this point. It's something that we could fine tune a little bit later. Now I want to travel that line up through the foot, the ankle, the knee, and now we come up to that hip joint, that ball and socket. And as we move up, again, what I'd love to see is that line that keeps continuing right into the middle of the hip socket. And as I'm looking at Kerstyn, I see a little bit of an upward angle from this hip to this hip. But again, at this point, that's something that we could clean up when we're paying a little bit more attention to. For our viewers right now, what's important is that line that follows all the way up through those joints and trying to see a levelness right here from the top to the bottom. Now we're going to travel up, and what I'd like people to imagine is if there were a line that was falling right down the middle of Kerstyn, what we'd like to see as far as the torso goes, what we see on one side is what we see on the other side. So I'd be looking at landmarks of right here. Do I see that the hip level is the same? Do I see that the level from the upper rib cage to that hip level is the same? For example, oftentimes on people, I'll see where one rib cage is collapsed a bit more than the other. Other things to look for is there a shift? Do we see a popping out of ribs to one side, but yet a concave on the other? Or is there a rotation? Is there a twisting through the rib cage? So these are all things to be mindful of as we travel up that plumb line of center. Now, as I move up the line just a bit more, I'm looking at the shoulder height, and we've got these little knobs right here at the top of the shoulder blade. Don't worry about the technical names. If you nerd out like I do, I'll be happy to write that down in the description box of this video. But I'd be looking at, do we see a levelness on one side to the other with those little landmarks? Also, where are the collarbones? Are they level? Is one forward or back of the other? A little bit more rotated in or opened wide? So again, that type of symmetry, the evenness across from one side to the other. Now, as we're still traveling up, I'm even looking at the neck and the head placement. Do I see, for example, a crunching in on one side or a lengthening on the other? You can really tell if the chin does not line up right over this notch, what we call the clavicular notch. If you see the chin tipped off to one side or the other, that's going to tip you off as the position of the neck. And then finally, what I'd love to see in this analysis is a line from the chin through the tip of the nose, right up through the middle of the forehead or directly through the eyebrows, so that when it comes to a level head, what we'd want to see is that plumb line coming out through the crown of the head, not tipped forward or not tipped back, but all the way up through the ceiling. So that takes care of our front, what we're looking for. Now we're going to travel over to the side of Kerstyn and see what our plumb line brings us over here. So as we look again from the bottom to the top, I'm starting with the feet, and I want to see my plumb line come from the ankle, through the knee, through the hip joint. So let's talk about this right now. Oftentimes I will see, I'm going to borrow Kerstyn's knee a minute, I may see a knee that's forward, or I may see a knee that's pushed back. And this can be different from one side to the other. So we have to be very careful to make sure that we analyze both sides. But ideally, I'd love to see that line coming up through the middle of the ankle, the middle of the knee, all the way up to the middle of the hip. Now, what Kerstyn has graciously let me point out is that we have what we call an anterior or a forward tip of the pelvis, where the plumb line would be going right up through here. I'm going to tip back just a tad. Instead, we have a forward tipping of the pelvis. Again, this is something that Kerstyn and I can work on together as far as what the muscles need to do to correct that. But now we'll travel up the rib cage. Sometimes I will see a rib cage that's protruding to the front, or I may see a rib cage that's protruding to the back. And then when we get into the shoulder blades, sometimes we have what's called an inferior angle, or this pointed part of the shoulder blade winging or tipping forward away from the rib cage. So I would love to see that shoulder blade against the ribs, and then also that I can see as I trace this medial border of her shoulder blade or scapula that it does lie nicely against the rib cage. Now as I travel up Kerstyn's neck, if we had a plumb line, we'd see that, again, Kerstyn has allowed me to say this, that we see that the chin is tucked forward. We kind of call that tech neck nowadays, where the chin reaches forward, and sometimes it can compress right in through here. What we'd love to see is to have that plumb line follow through the base of the neck to this flap of the ear, and then right up through the crown of the head. So these are some basic landmarks to look at as you look at the side of a person. Now finally we're going to travel to the back of our lovely model. Again, we start at the feet. So when we see the feet rotated out, I'm looking at where is the weight of the body being placed. Is it falling back into the heels, or is it kind of rocking up on the toes? Right now, Kerstyn is very well planted between the front and the heel, so that's a really great base of support to start with. If I saw that Kerstyn was really rolling inwardly a lot here or rolling outwardly a lot here, again, this is something that we need to address with supination or pronation. I'm still following my plumb line. I would still like that to run up through the middle of the knee, and I'd like it to run up right into the middle of that joint again. So if I saw something again where a calf was bowed out or in, or if I saw a deviation with the kneecap, or say a rotating out or in coming directly from the hip socket itself, Kerstyn and I would be talking about that, and we'd bring that into alignment and how we would have to do that, what musculature is involved. But for now, we're going to continue upward. And some of the landmarks that we looked at in the front are some of the landmarks that we are going to look at in the back. I would love to see that fine plumb line following a lovely neutral spine. Sometimes I'll see something called scoliosis, where the spine is curved off to the side. And even if that's not available, scoliosis, I still might see a collapsing through the rib cage, or a tilt or a twist through here. Again, what we'd like to see is basic vanilla. We'd like to see both sides lined up. Finally, as we move up to the shoulder blades, I would really like to see that the inferior angles are even. I'd again like to see that our knobbies right here are level. And I'd like to see that the notch of the neck follows the rest of the spine down to the tailbone. Then I'm looking up at the head, and a lot of times you can see deviations. Sometimes, again, the chin will be tucked off to one side or the other. You would see that tilt of the head from the back side as well. I'd be looking at ear placement as well, the earlobe to the shoulders. And then finally, again, I'd like to see that line coming all the way up through Kerstyn's head. So when you're doing this postural analysis on yourself, or if you have a friend that can look at these landmarks with you, it gives you something to think about. It gives you something a little bit more to pay attention to. And finally, it's going to give you better daily life posture, but also for your riders out there. Think about how this is going to enhance your riding once you're on your horse and in the saddle. Hope this information was valuable to you. See you later.